Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Cool. Okay, my name's Karthik, and I'm going to be talking to you today about automating your incident management process. My colleague, actually my boss, Piers, he gave a talk yesterday talking about sort of the tail end of this process and how we can build a whole lot of information out of it. And today I'm just going to talk about the tools that we've put in place to manage our incidents to give us that information. So just a little spiel at the beginning. For those of you who don't know, Xero is a software as a service for small business accounting. So basically, we build an app that small businesses can use to reconcile all of their accounting, all of their bank statements, and then produce reports at the end of the year for tax purposes, those sorts of things. And we build a whole suite of tools also for their accountants and their bookkeepers. When I started at Xero, I think our customer count in terms of total number of organizations was around 900,000. And in the 18 months since I've been there, we've now grown to actually over 1.3 million. And so with all of that growth comes constant demand for new features, new capabilities, and underlying all of that, a constant need for reliability. But as we all know, with all the changes that were happening, we had well over 1,000 releases last year, and I think we've already surpassed that number already this year. With all of that change comes the constant risk of things going down. And when we sort of embarked down the SRE process, which was actually relatively recently, I think the SRE team was only established a few months before I started, things were fairly rudimentary, and we would definitely be more of an operational team, a team of firefighters, if you will, with not a lot of tools to help us. And as we've progressed into a more mature SRE team, one thing I would definitely say is those fires still exist. They're not going to go away. The only difference is now we've built tools to help us handle those fires. So rather than the people fighting the fires, we've built the fire engine, and we've empowered our product teams to go and drive those fire engines. And so what I'm going to talk about today is what's the guts of that fire engine? And especially, how does it figure in the different stages of your incident management process? So typically, when we talk about incident management, we can break it up into sort of three broad areas. Particularly, the things that you're concerned with are how are you going to react quickly to something happening, and how do you respond quickly once you've reacted to it. And then sort of from a reliability standpoint, maybe the most important part is how do you review what went wrong and build your system better so that the next time something like this comes along, it either just doesn't happen or you're better equipped to deal with it. And when you're early on in the SRE process, generally these phases are dealt with in a fairly rudimentary fashion. Maybe at the beginning, your reaction is to panic. In the middle, your response is to run around like a headless chicken. And at the end, the way you review your incident is to get some sleep. But as you build more tools and as you build more processes around incident management, you can actually start getting some value out of it. To the point where, as an SRE now, when I'm running an incident, I'm sort of licking my lips at the prospect of running the postmortem for that incident and actually generating some work and making that product better. So here's a little taster for some of the tools I'll be talking about and some of the automation that we built. But I'll go through each of these in turn. So let's start at the beginning. So most of you, even if you come from a non-SRE, just an operational background, you should be familiar with sort of the standard monitoring and alerting process. So you will have your software running somewhere, and you'll have instrumentation in your software that allows it to be monitored, either in the form of logs, in the form of metrics, whatever you want. And then your monitoring system will be looking at those metrics, seeing if some anomalous behavior is happening, and if so, it will be alerting someone or something to go and do something about it. And the sort of the basic thing that most SRE teams are going to have to deal with is setting this up. So as new systems come online, as new products get added to your portfolio, you need to keep this up to date. And in an ideal world, this is how we would detect all of the problems that we have with our systems. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world, and especially at the beginning of the SRE journey, something that you're going to have to deal with, which isn't nice, but it's a reality, is your customers coming to you and telling you there's a problem. What you could do is just bury your head in the sand and pretend that nothing's gone wrong. Hey, I can't see something's gone wrong on my dashboard, so there can't be anything wrong. Oh, but actually, your customers are probably the strongest signal you're ever going to get. And so it's important not to throw that information away. One thing that we found is that those user reports that typically came in through our customer experience team, so they're our sort of direct interface with our customer base, we typically found that that sort of information wasn't feeding through to our alerting system the same way that all of our automated alerts would do. And so that meant that we weren't reacting in the same way. So one of the first things that we did when we took a look at our triage process and our reaction process was to make sure that we're capturing these user reports the same way that we're capturing our automated alerting. So at the end of the day, it appears as an alert that an engineer can receive in exactly the same way as something from our automated monitoring system. And that way they have consistency across any kind of alerting source. And that means that they can react to it. They don't have to go and log into separate systems or that sort of thing to deal with that. And sort of looking further down the line, at the other end of the process when we review this stuff, it means that regardless of whether it's coming from our automated alerting system or from user reports, it all gets consumed into one report at the end of the day. So we're able to produce analytics on all kinds of different alerts that way. So why is this actually important, though, to get your alerts appearing in a consistent form? And the answer is because if you're waking people up at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, the last thing that they want to do is have to dig around trying to find what's gone wrong. And one of the main things that we decided to do is, when we built out our monitoring and started building templates for other teams to start using, is look at what we would like to see in each alert. And it comes down to just a few basic things. So obviously, what has happened, which system was affected, and what can we do about it? What has actually gone wrong? So things like runbooks or any information that we can give to the engineer to help them start start diagnosing and maybe even repairing the problem, they're all going to drive down the time it takes for that incident to go away. Now that's all very well on the automated side because we have all that information to hand. We can tag all of our resources in our various clouds, and we can bring that information into the alert. But what about those manual alerts I was talking about? Well, the way we gather that information is to ask them. Ask the person who reported the issue, what was the impact? Which site had the problem? where is it occurring, when did it start? And all of this information gets consumed into the alert the same way that an automated alert would happen, and it gets displayed. Obviously, we're not going to get the same fidelity that we get with our automated monitoring, but at least it's some information for them to start working with. Instead of this whole conversation that needs to happen, which is normally what would happen before we started this, we already have some information that we can work with. And we can start building our incident management process for that particular incident. Now, another thing that's really important is who owns that system that was affected. And the reason that is important is because now that we're empowering our product teams to go and take care of their own systems in production, we don't want to receive their alerts. We want to send these alerts directly to them. But at the same time, we want to be able to provide coverage for those cases that they can't field those alerts directly. So the way we set up our on-call management system is something like this. We have a number of different teams, either working on the platform space, maybe in networks, maybe in databases, and then a number of other teams working in the product space, working on our payroll product, working on our small business accounting product. And each of those have their own on-call roster. And ideally, all of the alerts for the systems that they own go directly to them. But what about a new team? You know, a team that's just come online, maybe it's a new product that we've developed. Maybe they're not going to have that capacity from day one to do 24/7 support. That's fine. They can just roster themselves in for as long as they can, create a schedule, maybe from business hours in their particular region, and then for the rest of the time, alerts will flow through to us in SRE, and we have our own regional follow-the-sun type approach, as well as after-hours support, which covers every other team in the business, if we really need to. But ideally, we don't want to be fielding those alerts. Essentially, all we want to do is, if we get their alert, then we're going to be sharing the pain with them. So this is all well and good. You know, we can provide this coverage. We can set up a fairly complex system. But then, what about that new team? How do they integrate into that process? So one of the things that we decided to build. You've heard of the previous talk in this room was about infrastructure as code and testing that. We decided to set up an on-callas code system in the same kind of flavor. The idea is, rather than using our on-call management system, which is PagerDuty, we take advantage of their API to basically build a configuration that we can validate, we can code review, and we can test against various things, and then have that automatically synchronized with our on-call configuration. And the advantage of this approach is that we're able to lock everything down into a standardized view. So people can't go in and change this critical element of our infrastructure, because these engineers and the fact that they can be notified, that needs to be reliable too. And so that's why it's important to build something like this to make sure that as we bring new teams online, that they're properly integrated into our monitoring and alerting system. So those are some examples of some of the ways that we can react quickly and get the information to the right people so that they can then start managing an incident. But this is quite a scary process, especially for someone new. Having to deal with an alert, from our millions of customers that may be down, it can be a scary process to deal with. And so one of the things that we can address with this is that we can provide them guidance, and we can provide them with a safety net in the form of a chatbot that basically just guides them through the process. And so we call this In Xero, we call our incident management chatbot Multivac. What Multivac does can basically be classified into 3 areas. One comes under the framework of incident control. So we'll be guiding them through our incident management framework so that even if they're not completely familiar with it, we're giving them pointers on each step of the way. And we're also going to be helping them to communicate with the wider audience. I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. The other thing that Multivac does at the moment is provides some rudimentary mechanisms to discover what's going on in our production environment. For example, we can see what software has been released recently, what changes are scheduled to occur or have been scheduled to occur, and those sorts of things to help us make a decision about what might have gone wrong. So what do I mean by communicating effectively in an incident? One thing that you'll notice, if you haven't got a well-defined incident management process, in an unmanaged incident, what tends to happen is engineers will basically just focus on the problem in isolation. And they'll neglect to inform or even collaborate with a range of other technical resources and non-technical resources that we have in the company and available to help them. And so this is nothing new. What you'll find is that in the process of managing these incidents, you'll often need to define various roles and responsibilities. And the 2 key ones that we employ are the incident controller, who sort of takes care of the technical side, and the the communications lead, who takes care of that non-technical side, keeping everyone informed, keeping our status page up to date, those sorts of things. And by dividing those roles and responsibilities, we ensure that all of the different parties keep abreast of the whole situation that's happening in the incident. So here's an example of me using Multivac to start responding to an incident. So it will guide me through setting the severity for that incident. I can ask it to see what each of those severity levels mean. Then I can see what's been released recently in our environment. It turns out that our mobile teams released something recently, so then I can go and page them and to get them responding to the problem. So this is just a taster of some of the things that we can do. Under the hood, it's important to realize that even though this is a chatbot, it's not a toy, and in fact it becomes a critical piece of our infrastructure in itself, because when things go wrong, we need this to behave reliably as well. So there's a whole load of different things that we went through just to make sure that we can depend on our chatbot when we need it. I'd be happy to talk about this stuff in more detail later on. So finally, coming into the end of the incident, so things have been restored, and now we're at the point where we need to really fix things up. So obviously, most of you should be familiar with the post-mortem process. And with Multivac, we're able to generate a lot of this information automatically. So typically, when we run a post-mortem, we have 2 key areas. We're capturing some knowledge, and we're planning some actions based on that knowledge that we've captured. With Multivac, it will generate us a template sort of post-mortem document that we can start using. It looks a bit like this one. It's just a Google Doc. And then in the process of running our kickoff meeting for that post-mortem, we'll be filling out that Google Doc. And it will have all the associated information because we were using the chatbot to run our incident. And so we have it all linked and available for us. And as Piers was talking about yesterday, over time, when we've built a lot of these action plans and knowledge capture documents, we're able to do that meta-analysis. So we can see trends over time. We can see the types of components that are really causing reliability issues that we should be focusing on. So that's just a taster, going through the 3 different stages of incident management, but we're not finished there. So obviously we've got lots of different things that we can work on next. One of the main things that we've been doing in the past few months is working on a new framework like this one, but specifically for security incident management. So it's essentially just a slightly refashioned way, a new checklist and a new framework just for security incidents, because they look a little bit different to your typical infrastructure incidents. We're also taking all of that discovery information out of, the discovery functionality, out of Multivac and refactoring it into a separate microservice architecture that we can then share with the rest of our company in different ways. We've also been thinking about how we can best open source the incident management functionality of Multivac. We've had a few discussions with some people in Australia and New Zealand, and there's a few things going on there. Right now, I'm not sure if it's the best way to simply release what we've got or look at the next generation of our chatbot and maybe start looking at open sourcing that side, but certainly something we're thinking about. And obviously, we want to be capturing more data for our postmortem so that we can really start playing around with that data and then developing those long-term trends. Alrighty, so that's basically a whirlwind tour through our incident management process at Xero. Each of the topics that I've just talked about, I have blogged about them on our Xero developer blog. That QR code will take you to the last part of that blog series and contains links to the other parts. So if you're interested in any of the stuff, please do take a look. But otherwise, I'd be happy to take any questions.